is my pleasure today to introduce to you as we continue our conversations with Dr. Keith, my dear beloved friend and soul brother and peer, Dr. Jim Lockard, who has just joined us online. And let me just tell you a little bit about him for those of you that may or may not know him. Many of you do know him. He's an accomplished minister, having led several different spiritual centers through California, the East Coast. I just went blank on what's Maryland, I believe, and then several in California. He's a well-known teacher, a published author, a very successful blogger that I encourage all of you to follow him, a loved and beloved father, a world traveler, a wine connoisseur, a friend, and a new thought provocateur. Dr. Jim, look what you're living
Yes,
up to.
hello. Thank you. You left out Florida on the East Coast, but
Oh,
we
that's
need to
fine.
mention that because that
I,
was where I
I,
was the
I
longest.
was tapped into Florida when I was
Yeah.
thinking it, but I didn't say it. So, so everyone, Jim is joining us to this day. It's not day where he is from Lyon, France. So welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. I thought I would put a backdrop up of my beloved adopted city. And it's wonderful to connect with all of you and just knowing, we people say, do you miss the United States? I say, I miss the people, and
Right.
especially those people that I've known through the Centers for Spiritual Living and New Thought. So we're looking forward to being able to visit later this year.
Well, I know it's had its moments of being tedious there, but yet, as we were speaking of earlier, it's been joyful in its own way because you're able to get out and venture into an adventure of this chosen new home that you and your beloved wife Dorianne had. So,
Yeah. Yeah, well, we do have easy access to French food and French wine, so we're managing,
oh,
let's put it
good. Good.
that
Well, so happy to have you
way.
back. You've been with us before for one of our conversation series. I believe the last time you were here, we were um, going through the process of the marches taking place around the world relative to Black Lives Matter, and a lot has
Mhm.
changed since then. And so, tapping into the theme of today is the day, what speaks to you in this very moment of today is the day?
I think today is the day we're in the transition at various stages in the transition from being in this global pandemic to whatever follows. And I think it's really critical that we be incredibly conscious about how we approach the unfolding of what's next. Because it's tempting to want to go back to the way things were, and there was a lot of good things, but it's also a real opportunity to create something new and something that's maybe more fair and more uh, better for the planet and that is kinder and gentler than it was in the past. So we're at one of those moments that is just so ripe with potential.
Absolutely. And it's not only ripe with potential, but I think it gives us the real opportunity to listen, right, as to what is being called for without thinking that we necessarily have to have that answer, you know? So, even as you said, what we create, I think it's critical for us to remember that we're just one component of the creative process.
Yeah.
And the quote that I want to kick off this part with, which is by someone I know that you not only love and adore and revere, but practice a lot, which is by Joseph Campbell. And the quote is, the goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the heartbeat of the universe, to match your nature with nature.
Yeah, I love that quote, you can bring that right into Ernest Holmes and talk about being an expression of the authentic self.
Right?
Of that, I'm doing near the end of a 9-month course with some private students, and one of the things we've been studying is Carl Jung and the idea of living to your soul's agenda. And
Hmm.
in religious science terms, the soul would be the deepest part of me that's me.
Hmm.
If you go one step below the soul, you're in the universal. So the soul is the beginning of the individualization of the universal as me, as you, or whatever, the case. And it contains my wisdom. My soul contains my wisdom to live the most fulfilling version of me that I'm capable of living. And your soul contains that for you. And your soul has an agenda. The agenda is to be fulfilled and experience as much of the infinite as possible. So that divine urge, which Campbell also spoke about, Campbell once said that human beings are protoplasm with an urge, that we are really seeking to live fully. What is the best version of me at any given moment? And how can I come into alignment at the conscious, the subconscious, the unconscious level with my soul's agenda to a more exacting way, rather than being driven by the forces of my interpretation of the external world.
Right.
So I need to bring my power back inside. I need to recognize that I can relax into this process. It shouldn't be a stressful one. And that when I manage to do that, my life works, and I'm able to be a positive contribution to the lives of others. So that just to me speaks right out of that specific.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I just went into this fantastic visual of what that, how I can frame what that is that the depths of my soul is right on the edge of the universal. And so it's as if there is this veil of the perimeter of the universal as we move into it. And then if our soul is at that deepest level, that's a really big idea. And it's one that could be both overwhelming and yet at the same time alluring and true, right? And so for me personally, I love that because what it reminds me to do, both as a student and a teacher, which is to remember that essence, as much as I have a individual divine soul, my individual divine soul is a result of the universal divine soul, right? That cosmic force. And so, as I was just saying, the creation part is not mine to do alone. I have a role and a responsibility in that process. But there is that which is universal and cosmic, which is greater, to align myself with as I tap into opening up to what's to emerge as the new. That leads us, of course, perfectly to our next quote, which is by Albert Einstein, which is this: the most beautiful and profound emotion we can experience is the sensation of the mystical. He, not being gender specific, to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead.
Yeah, the mystical, that's something that in our teaching and in the science of mind, I see it as sort of a double helix, sort of a two channels, if you will, of awareness. And one is working with the law. One is learning to use our psychological mechanism to create beliefs that allow us to thrive, that allow us to have what we desire in life and allow us to give of ourselves effectively in life. The other part of the helix is courting the beloved. It's that dance with the mystical. It's the recognition that we exist in duality. And the duality is we have a physical reality, but we also have a divine reality. Mm-hmm. We are of the transcendent. So science of mind ideally, and I think beautifully, braids these two together. So as we develop in our ability to work with the law, we're hopefully also developing our ability to have this mystical dance of connection with that which is beyond our physical reality and that which is beyond words. So it's that's the beauty of the teaching to me. It's a teaching of oneness, whereas the religion I grew up in said creator up here and creation down here. Right. And they were two different things. But this is really a real blending of that idea of oneness. It allows us to say, I'm part of the greater, as you mentioned, we're part of that universal whole. We co-create within our community of fellow souls, and yet we have the capacity to learn how to use the law and trust in the law to help us to move toward that sense of, again, I think fulfillment is the word. When I'm fulfilled, I'm living a good life, and I'm also contributing. And that to me is the whole package.
And you're also fulfilling that urge that you just spoke of, that Campbell said, that what we're here to do, right? So that not only fulfills that urge for the human, but it also fulfills the urge of the divine, right? Because the divine's urge is for us to express itself wholly and completely, right?
Yeah.
And to emerge and through that emergence, be evolving to a greater awareness of who we are as that power. The when you speak of the mystical and the law, I'd love to, let's just break it down for any listeners or viewers that we have that may be new to this teaching, in the sense that when we talk of that power that we're one with, we use the term God as well as source and love and the divine power. It's important for us to remember that in this philosophy and faith and way of life, it's a power that is unfailing and impersonal, right? And then the law itself is also impersonal. So it's simply, as Ernest says, it's responding by corresponding to how we are diving into our engagement with the mystical, right? And so into that element of oneness. And I think in today's world, we are called both at that human level and an awareness of our divine to really expand our understanding and engagement into oneness.
Yeah.
If nothing more than when we just saw each other online the last time we did this conversation, so much has transpired in the world and we have information in such a new way and so immediate that it's important to not just respond to what's coming at us informationally, but to look at it through the lens of oneness.
Yeah, and I think another aspect to that is to recognize that the more I can realize that oneness is my true nature, and the more fulfilled I can become in expressing my soul's agenda for me, the more compassionate I can be toward others. Compassion arises out of that realization of oneness. It arises out of that sense of, I know I'm enough. I know that I have within me everything I need to be fulfilled. Therefore, I can be compassionate toward you, which doesn't mean I'm always kind to you. It means I can be absolutely truthful and from a loving perspective with you. And that is the gift that we seem to be missing. We seem to see this fear that grips so many of us that withholds compassion, that has to make the other the enemy, that has to make everyone wrong, that has to jump all over and pile on social media. You know, it's so disappointing in a sense to see that, you know, I love Eric Butterworth in Unity used to say there's only one sin in New Thought, and that's the frustration of potential.
I like that. So
When
say
we,
that
when
again,
we,
please.
yeah, there's only one sin in New Thought, and that's the frustration of potential.
Got it.
So the frustration of potential is when I shut off that intuitive knowing. I get conditioned to look outside for what I should be doing and who I should be following and what I should be listening to. And I lose that connection and I lose that sense of myself in source. So then I have to have someone to blame for my problems.
Right. I agree with you. Yeah. I would frame that in just a different way in that I think so often we are programmed to believe that to give compassion means that we give approval. And approval isn't required to express compassion. I like to break that word down in this sense. So compassion is to live with passion. And then if you break the word passion down to pass I on. So when living with passion, we're passing on that place, we're acknowledging that place where we're all interconnected, that oneness of life itself. And so then to live with compassion means to consciously live from that place of the oneness that we share, which is already transcendent of approval or disapproval, right? It's already that place. It's not about condition. It's about causation. It's about life itself. Obviously, we know how the power works. So that leads us exactly to the exact right next quote, which just, I don't even put it in any order. I just throw them, print them out. I have them here. And it's this: compassion and caring are the ties that bind us together in mutual understanding and in the unified attempt to uncover the divinity in each other. Ernest Holmes.
Yeah. You start with the idea that oneness is the truth, even though it's a difficult truth for us to fully comprehend, because our senses tell us something different.
Right.
Our senses say, I'm here and you're there, and I'm me and you're you. And that we disagree sometimes, or whatever, whatever the case may be. So oneness is something that we have to come at in a way that's not just based on our sensory understanding or sensory perception. So we look to the great teachers of wisdom. And universally, the great spiritual teachers have all spoken of oneness.
Mm-hmm.
And oneness is something we have to. It's sort of a mental leap that we have to be able to take in order to say, yes, okay, I can't see it. I can't really perceive things as being one. I may have, I've been fortunate. I've had a couple of mystical experiences where I experience oneness that I can't even begin to describe to you because language doesn't allow it. So how do we then take that idea and say, okay, if that's the fundamental underlying reality, how do I then bring myself into it more and more and more so that I can be a compassionate being? A compassionate being recognizes oneness. If I don't recognize oneness, the best I can do is sympathy. And sympathy is okay. It's better than antipathy. But sympathy is, I'm sorry that happened to you. And a little voice inside me says, I'm glad it didn't happen to me.
Right.
Whereas compassion is, oh my God, we're one.
Right.
And can I do a really quick story about compassion?
Sure.
This goes, two of our minister friends, David Leonard and Carol Carnes, were
David
in
Leonard
South
was
Africa.
David Leonard was our last conversational
Well,
guest.
there you go.
Yeah.
And in 1993, they were in South Africa for the Parliament of World Religions, and they were staying at a hotel away from where the conference was. And they had to walk through a kind of seedy part of Johannesburg. And Carol said that there would be these storefronts. Remember the old time storefronts? It would be a window that would go into a V and then the front door would go in. Some of them exist, but they're pretty much gone. And they said in these storefronts would be literally piles of children that were homeless. And they might have a dirty blanket covering like 10 kids. And one morning, they were walking to the conference and Carol just took all the money out of her purse and threw it under the blanket. And David's like, what? That's really nice, but why did you do that for those children? She goes, David, they're our children.
Right.
So that's compassion. That's a sense of, there's no sense of separation. There's a recognition that you and I are one, and I can feel, it can be emotional or not, but I can recognize myself in you. And when you're suffering, I can be there for you in a really authentic way. And that's kind of rare because we have to develop it. I think we have it as children in many respects, but then as we grow up, sort of, we get conditioned out of it. We, look out for yourself and don't trust anybody, and those kinds of fake wisdom ideas that we get, and we end up being older and distant, and we grow bitter and we grow angry, and our lives don't work. So it would be, you'd think when something isn't working, you'd try something different.
You'd have a new thought.
Yeah, exactly. But we don't, for some reason we don't. We just double down. We double down on our distrust. We double down on saying, everybody but me is messed up, or whatever the case may be. And we see the effects of that all around us, unfortunately.
So I have a practical way for us to begin to lean into that mystical nature, because you use the term of taking a leap, right? And I think the challenge for many people is they don't know how to take that leap. And I think that I'm going to hit us with three things. So one is you have to be willing to take the leap. That's the first component. The second is set the intention, right? Because we know inherent within the intention is the fulfillment of its desire, right? Inherent within the seed of intention, as Deepak Chopra tells us. And then the third is, as one of my teachers said, Fred Wilson, whenever you're confronted with someone that you have conflict with, immediately see them as someone's son or daughter.
Yeah.
Right? So it just shifts your perspective immediately so that you see them differently. And then from that place, we can come from compassion.
Yeah. And it's something we have to grow into.
Right.
And we have to have compassion for ourselves. See, that's the first thing. I have to, and compassion for myself doesn't mean letting myself off the hook.
Right.
Quite the contrary. It means being ruthlessly honest with myself, but from a loving place.
Right.
So
loving
once we do that, we can do it with others.
And so loving both emotionally, right? That human love, right? But also from the agape love. It's to be loving with ourselves from that place where love exists within us as a quality of the divine, right? So the next quote I have for us is from Joe Dispenza. And when I saw it this morning, I thought of you, so I had to pull it up. And it's this: the quantum field responds not to what we want, it responds to who we are being.
Hmm. Wow. I just did a series of blog posts on this, on the idea of a being state.
Uh huh.
Being, B-E-I-N-G,
Right.
being state. My being state is what the universe corresponds to in terms of outpicturing my life. So it's another term for consciousness.
Correct.
Who am I being today? Not what am I doing, because what I'm doing at the conscious level may be contrary to who I'm being. You know, so the being state is so critical, and the quantum field, I think, is another euphemism for the universal, for God, for spirit.
Yes.
The quantum field responds and corresponds to the intelligence within our being state, to the frequency, if you will, that our being state is putting off, and gives us corresponding energies that we express. So, if you've ever messed up your life, or self-sabotage or something like that, that's probably because your being state was in a place of somewhat depression, some kind of depression, and it was attracting to it that would continue that pathway. Whereas if you're in a really good space about yourself, the good stuff tends to heap up, and come at you more frequently. So yeah, I think that's absolutely the way we would say in Science of Mind, the way it works
Right.
is spirit corresponds to consciousness, quantum field corresponds to our being state.
I like what you're saying, and the quote I too just taught one of the classes, the class series I'm teaching. One of the classes was on being. What did I come here to be, right? But what I love about this quote from Dispenza is when he uses the term the quantum field, and I agree with you. It's that state of potentiality. It's that field of creation. What we're talking about, but it gives the word alone connects to that resonance field within us, that steep within us, that knows we do have the ability to take a quantum leap, because you and I know, have each done it in our lives and our belief system. I've also had those mystical experiences that you're talking about. It's really about the willingness to be something more than what we think we can be. I've talked often about, I've had teachers, and I'm sure you've had teachers, and I've been this teacher, when I've been able to see in a student or someone, a congregant, a truth about them. We do that as practitioners, that they're unable to see for themselves until they can, right? And that's what we're called in this teaching to do, is to not just use it to manifest things, to use it to be a conscious participant in the evolving consciousness of humanity. Rumi, the next quote shows up, tells us this in this context, and I love it as it comes from the 12th century, right? Of be a lamp or a lifeboat or a ladder. Help someone's soul heal. Walk out of your house like a shepherd.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm drawn to say, but first, get your house in order.
Of course, yeah.
I had a teacher, Lou Tice, who was just a brilliant man, and he used to talk about being authentic. He says the problem is some of people become authentic, but they're an authentic jerk
Right.
because they haven't done the inner work yet to then step out into the world and be a force. But yes, if my intention is to be a positive example for others, let's say, whether you're a teacher or whether you're just walking down the street with a certain countenance, and people can pick up on that. It really is, that inner work has to be done first.
Right. Well, I
We have
think
so
I
many
agree with
people.
you, but I
Yeah.
also think it can be done simultaneously.
Oh yeah, I agree. And part of it is that aspiration
Right.
to grow up. The problem is we see so many people that are in the public eye today that are self-destructive, and that are also encouraging others to activate that self-destructive aspect in themselves.
Right.
So that's why I say, everybody that has a platform isn't necessarily someone we should listen to.
Oh, no, no, no. We should absolutely use our
Right.
discernment.
Yes, for
We should
sure.
check into the vibrational frequency to which they're emitting and ask, does that line up with us?
Yeah.
And so,
Well,
as in
I can
using them as
always
a law of attraction, use the law of deflection and
and
deflect them.
you can sense someone else's being state.
Oh, absolutely.
Another Joseph Campbell quote was, "Don't listen to what is being said, listen to what is speaking."
Correct. Right.
That idea.
Yeah. And I agree. And then become clear on what we want to be right?
Yeah.
And then get really clear on what it looks like when others show up in our world, as you're just talking about. I love this quote of, I have too often projected expectations onto others and then condemned them for not becoming the fictional characters I alone had created.
Yeah.
So 'cause that's part of the journey, right?
Sure. Sure. Everything is projection. I mean, Jung tells us that. And the question is, when I become aware of what I'm projecting, I can get a sense of, am I projecting health and healthy aspects of myself, or am I projecting more the sense of that which is lacking in awareness or lacking in a self-acceptance, you know? So it can be important. It is important to learn to notice what you're projecting. And the way we do that is by noticing our emotional reactions to what people mirror back to us.
Hmm.
So if you think about the people in your life that irritate you or anger you, quite often that is a process of what we call shadow work, where you're projecting that quality from yourself onto them. They mirror it back, and you get irritated, not really at them, you're really irritated at yourself. So that's where we get our clues as to what we need to work on, you know.
Yeah, and the thing that he says here that I just had an aha on was the element of the condemnation. And so then how does that, if we are then condemning them for that, then how does that condemnation show up? And I remember in a situation in my life at one point, I was hanging on to some stuff around things that had happened in my life. And I made the comment to something to the effect of, well, maybe I should look into forgiveness. And I remember your response. And it was something to the effect of, well, that is always the answer, right?
Yeah.
It was, and it triggered in a really good way something within me of, well, of course, like that makes perfect, like everything. It doesn't mean forget, doesn't mean that I want
Yeah.
to be around them, but it means for the own personal, my own personal journey to
Yeah.
heal, which is really then to understanding that in that context of the fictional characterization that I had created around that situation.
Yeah, we make stuff up all the time and we put it on other people. And it usually is stuff that we need to heal in ourselves.
Right.
And the missing link is often that we don't notice that they're just mirroring it back to us. We think it's them. It's not me, it's you. And that's almost always incorrect. so it's part of the fun, in a sense, of self-development, is you have to have a sense of humor about it, because you're going to find some things that are not necessarily flattering and are in fact disturbing about yourself. So how do I manage to handle that in a way that allows me to grow through that limitation to something that's closer to my actual potential?
I love that. That's a lot to digest. I love that. But it'll be interesting to see how then you respond to this next quote, because it takes us to another perspective of that, or layer, which is this. You can't control how other people receive your energy, or anything you do or say gets filtered through the lens of whatever they are going through at the moment, which is not about you.
Yeah, and that's true. They're responsible for their reaction, but I'm responsible for my reaction to their reaction.
Mhm. Right.
And that's where often we get hung up on just the projection piece, where we just, and the person may be being a jerk, the person may be being arrogant, or whatever it is that's bothering us, but the fact that it has an emotional hit on us, on me, means it's my quality.
Right.
Otherwise I would just notice it. I wouldn't necessarily have an emotional reaction or a distancing. And the same with what we call the light shadow, which is where you adore someone else and you say, oh, I could never be as wonderful as, we do this with celebrities all the time, and other figures, where, isn't Oprah wonderful and I could never be like she is. And same thing we say, isn't that child molester awful and I could never do what he or she is doing. The reality is you have the capacity for both, see, but we limit ourselves down and we project these qualities that we've repressed out onto others, and then we react to it. So the treatment that I do, the spiritual mind treatment that I want to do, is to be open to my projections, is to recognize that, my reactions are my reactions and other people's reactions are their own, but how I react to them is mine. And am I judging them? Am I saying, oh, look what a jerk that person's being, or look how great that person's being? And really, it doesn't have much to do with that. That's really a deflection to keep me from looking at something that I may want to be working on.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think that in 20th century metaphysics, we were certainly in the New Thought philosophies that you and I grew up in. It was really all about how do I think? How do I develop consciousness? How do I use the law of attraction, right? That was really the essence of what it was about. And I think in the modern world that we're in today, we need to layer upon that, and it's to go deeper and realize it's not only how I act, how I think, but how do I react and how do I interact with the thing itself and every expression of that, right? And then to live with compassion.
Yeah, that's all. That's always the goal for me is what would it look like whenever something doesn't go well? When I'm doing my review of it, I'll say, what would have it looked like if I had been fully compassionate in that interaction? And that gives me something to set an intention about. In other words, what would it look like if I didn't have the problem? Or what would it look like if I had behaved the way I aspire to behave? You see, and if I didn't behave that way, it means it's still an aspiration. But the fact that I can aspire to something better means I'm also capable of something better.
Right.
So what do I have to do in relation to spiritual practices and treatment and the other things that we would do to change that inner consciousness so that my reaction becomes closer to the aspiration over time?
Yeah. I think a great way to do that, and what I like to teach, is to then check in and ask myself, and very fundamentally and very foundationally, is what I'm being and the way that I'm showing up exhibiting and exuding the qualities of God: peace and power, beauty and joy, light, life, love, and wisdom, right? If not, then what do I need to do to align myself with those?
Yeah.
Right.
And when you're on target or when you're on the beam and when you're off the beam, we all know. It's a matter of just being honest with ourselves and saying, being compassionate with ourselves means I give myself a chance to do better.
Right.
And then do what it takes to do better. Rather than beating myself up and knocking myself down a peg, I need to I don't need to be knocked down a peg. I need to elevate a peg.
Right.
And that's often what we don't give ourselves a chance to do.
Right. To take that next step on the journey as a conscious evolutionist.
Yes.
As Barbara Marx Hubbard tells us, to then choose to live from our essence and not our ego.
Yeah. Compassion is always about enlargement.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're certainly called for that opportunity in today's world, right?
Yes.
In today's
opportunities abound.
Yeah. Well, my teacher, Fred Wilson, for years, the way he said, opportunity is everywhere and it's multi-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's happening in different levels all around us. Well, that's his words, or the same thing that Ernest Holmes taught about source or God or the thing itself. Right. The force is everywhere. Right. It's multidimensional around us. How do we filter that through us and as us to then be a co-creator to what we want to experience? And we get to do that by choosing to be whatever it is we're expressing. Right. Through the expression that we get the experience. Well, what a joy it is to have you here with us today. Any parting words you would like to share with our community?
Well, just I would just say be conscious of how you're planning your next few months and few years at this point, because we're at an inflection point culturally and socially, and it's a wonderful opportunity. No matter what the mass of people do, it's an opportunity for you to maybe set a different direction or a new direction that's more in your interest.
Thank
you. These opportunities don't necessarily come along all the time.
You're right.
So that's a value. Should I close with a treatment? Would you like me to do that?
We're not quite there yet. We'll come back.
When we get there, let me know.
As you're saying that, it reminds me that we meaning humanity, and then every element of the communities of humanity and individually, we're at at that moment that you're saying where we can move forward to an awakening. And as we all know, those big awakenings oftentimes come through either inspiration or desperation.
Yeah.
So we're at that influx point right now where we get to choose for it to be inspirational should we choose to do that.
Yes, for sure.
Great, thank you. Well, Jim, I love you. I can't wait. I love seeing you here, but I can't wait to see you in person when that
Yeah.
happens. So that'll either have to happen by you coming to the States or me going to France or both.